The sound of rain hitting the tin roof was deafening, drowning out the faint hum of the radio in the corner of the kitchen. Evelyn Carter sat in her worn armchair, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. Outside, lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the small farmhouse she had called home for over 50 years. Since her husband passed away a decade ago, the house felt much larger, the silence heavier. Evelyn had grown used to the loneliness, finding comfort in her routines, tending to the garden, baking pies for the church bake sale, and feeding the stray cats that often wandered onto her property. But this night felt different. There was something in the air, something electric that went beyond the storm. Then she heard it. A faint, desperate cry cut through the sound of the rain. Evelyn set her mug down and listened closely. At first she thought it might be a stray cat, but the cry was deeper, almost guttural and filled with pain. Grabbing her raincoat, she stepped out onto the porch. The wind whipped her gray hair into her face as she peered into the darkness. The cry came again, louder this time, from the direction of the barn. Evelyn grabbed a flashlight and made her way across the muddy yard, her boots sinking into the wet earth. As she approached the barn, the cries grew more frantic. She pushed the heavy door open, her flashlight cutting through the shadows. There in the corner of the barn was a small, soaking wet creature. Its tiny body shivered violently, and its large, dark eyes stared at her with a mix of fear and desperation. It was a baby baboon. Evelyn froze, her heart racing. She had seen baboons on television and in zoos, but she had never imagined finding one on her property in rural Oklahoma. The poor thing looked half-starved, its fur matted and dirty. "What on earth are you doing here?" she murmured, stepping closer. The baboon flinched but didn't try to run. It was too weak. Evelyn crouched down, setting her flashlight on the ground. She could see a makeshift rope tied loosely around one of its legs, as if someone had tried to keep it as a pet and then abandoned it. Evelyn's heart ached. "You've had a rough start, haven't you?" She reached out slowly, letting the baboon sniff her hand. It hesitated, then leaned forward, its tiny fingers gripping hers. "Well, I guess you're staying with me tonight," she said softly. Evelyn brought the baboon inside, wrapping it in an old towel and setting it near the fireplace. She warmed some milk on the stove and fed it with an eyedropper, her movements gentle and patient. As the hours passed, the baboon began to relax, its trembling subsiding. Evelyn couldn't help but smile as it nestled into the towel, its dark eyes closing in exhaustion. "I'll call you Buddy," she said, stroking its damp fur. "You look like you could use a buddy right now." The next morning, Evelyn called the local animal shelter, but they were at a loss. "A baboon?" the woman on the other end said, incredulous. "That's not exactly our specialty. You might want to call a wildlife rescue center." But Evelyn hesitated. She had only known Buddy for a few hours, yet she already felt an attachment to him. He had chosen her barn, her home, as his refuge. She decided to keep him. Buddy quickly became a fixture in Evelyn's life. She cleared out a small corner of the barn for him, filling it with blankets and toys. She researched everything she could about baboons, learning about their diets, habits, and needs. The neighbors were curious and skeptical. "Evelyn, are you sure you want to keep a wild animal around?" her friend Martha asked one afternoon over tea. "He's not wild anymore," Evelyn replied, smiling. "He's family." As weeks turned into months, Buddy grew, both in size and personality. He followed Evelyn everywhere, his long arms swinging by his sides as he trotted along behind her. He loved to sit on the porch swing with her, his head resting on her shoulder as they watched the sunset. He was mischievous, too, often sneaking into the kitchen to steal fruit from the counter or untying Evelyn's shoelaces just to make her laugh. "You're a troublemaker, you know that," Evelyn would say, though she couldn't hide her grin. Buddy was more than just a pet. He filled the empty spaces in Evelyn's life, bringing joy and laughter to a home that had been far too quiet for far too long. 2 years passed, and Buddy grew into a strong, intelligent adult baboon. He was fiercely loyal to Evelyn, always watching over her as she worked in the garden or tended to the animals. One evening, as another storm rolled in, Evelyn sat by the fire with Buddy curled up at her feet. She felt a twinge of pain in her chest, sharp and sudden. She brushed it off, assuming it was just heartburn. But the pain returned the next day, stronger this time. Evelyn knew she should see a doctor, but the thought of leaving Buddy alone worried her. "I'm fine," she told him, stroking his fur as if to reassure herself. "Just a little tired." Buddy looked at her with concern, his dark eyes filled with understanding. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn's health declined. She grew weaker, her movements slower. Buddy seemed to sense that something was wrong. He stayed close to her side, often refusing to eat until she did. One night, as the rain poured down outside, Evelyn sat in her chair by the fire, her breathing shallow. Buddy climbed onto the armrest, his large hand resting gently on hers. "You've been my best friend, Buddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Buddy let out a soft, mournful sound, his eyes never leaving hers. That was the last night Evelyn spent in her home. The next morning, the neighbors found her peacefully asleep in her chair, Buddy sitting silently beside her. The morning Evelyn passed away, the house felt eerily silent, except for the soft patter of rain against the windows. Buddy sat beside her motionless body, his head bowed, as if he understood she wasn't waking up. When the neighbors arrived, shocked and saddened by Evelyn's passing, they hesitated at the sight of the large baboon guarding her chair. Buddy's dark, intelligent eyes locked on theirs, not with aggression but with sadness. A protective presence ensuring no harm would come to the woman who had cared for him. "Poor thing," Martha whispered, stepping carefully into the room. "He must be devastated." But when the neighbors tried to take Evelyn's body, Buddy let out a low, mournful cry, gripping the arm of her chair tightly. "He doesn't want to leave her," said Jack, a retired farmer who had known Evelyn for years. Martha approached cautiously, her voice calm and soothing. "Buddy, it's okay. We're going to take care of her now." Buddy looked at Martha, then back at Evelyn. Slowly, reluctantly, he loosened his grip and stepped back, watching as they gently carried her away. The days that followed were a blur for Buddy. He roamed the house aimlessly, stopping to sit in the spots where Evelyn had spent the most time. Her favorite armchair, the kitchen table, the porch swing. He'd peer out the window at the garden they used to tend together, as if expecting her to walk through the gate with her wide-brimmed hat and gloves. But she never came. Martha and Jack, who had taken on the responsibility of caring for Buddy, tried their best to comfort him. They brought food and left the door to the barn open so he could come and go as he pleased. But Buddy rarely ate. He spent most of his time in Evelyn's chair, clutching one of her old shawls, which still carried her scent. One night during a heavy thunderstorm, Martha stopped by to check on Buddy. She found the house empty, the barn door was swinging open, and Buddy was gone. "Oh no," Martha said, panic rising in her chest. She grabbed a flashlight and called Jack. "Buddy's missing," she said. Jack arrived within minutes, and the two of them searched the property, calling Buddy's name. "He wouldn't just leave," Martha said, her voice trembling. "Not unless." Her eyes widened as realization struck. "Jack, he's gone to the cemetery." Martha and Jack drove through the storm to the small cemetery where Evelyn had been buried. As they pulled up, their headlights illuminated a heart-wrenching sight. Buddy was sitting by Evelyn's grave, his large frame hunched over as the rain poured down around him. He clutched a bundle of wildflowers in his hands, flowers he must have picked from the garden they'd tended together. Martha whispered, tears streaming down her face. They approached him slowly, but he didn't move. He simply sat there, his head bowed, as if mourning the only family he had ever known. After that night, Buddy seemed to change. It was as if he had come to terms with Evelyn's passing, but he hadn't forgotten her. Instead, he began to honor her memory in small, remarkable ways. Every morning, Buddy would walk to the garden and tend to the plants, pulling weeds and watering the flowers with the small can Evelyn used to carry. The neighbors watched in amazement as he worked with the same care and precision he had learned from her. When visitors came to the house, Buddy would greet them on the porch, his large, expressive eyes studying them carefully. There was one Saturday in particular when Buddy was en route to work, and he put on his car hat and, sitting at his computer, began to programming his usual routine. There was one Saturday in particular. He seemed to know who Evelyn's friends were, and he treated them with kindness, often bringing them small tokens. Flowers, shiny stones, or fruit from the trees. But it wasn't just the neighbors who noticed Buddy's actions. Word of the morning baboon spread quickly through the town, and soon people from neighboring communities came to see him. Some were skeptical, thinking it was just a wild animal behaving oddly. But when they saw Buddy's intelligence and the quiet dignity with which he carried himself, they were moved. Local newspapers picked up the story, calling Buddy a symbol of loyalty and love. One journalist wrote, "In a small farmhouse on the edge of town, a baboon named Buddy tends to a garden and greets visitors with kindness. His actions remind us of the bond we can share with animals and the way love can transcend even death." As the seasons passed, Buddy's bond with the community deepened. When someone was sick or struggling, Buddy seemed to know. He would appear at their door, leaving flowers or fruit on the porch. For the children, he became a gentle playmate, often letting them braid his fur or ride on his back as he walked around the yard. It was as if Buddy had taken Evelyn's spirit into himself, continuing her legacy of kindness and compassion. Martha and Jack, who had grown to love Buddy as their own, ensured he was well cared for, but they knew he didn't belong to them. Buddy belonged to Evelyn, and to the memory of everything she had stood for. One day, Martha found an envelope tucked into the mailbox at Evelyn's house. It was addressed to whoever cares for Buddy, written in Evelyn's elegant handwriting. Martha opened it, her hands trembling. Inside was a letter, dated just weeks before Evelyn's passing. "To whoever reads this, if you're reading this, it means I've gone. But don't worry about me. I've had a full, wonderful life. My only wish is that Buddy is cared for and loved. He's more than just an animal. He's a gift, a reminder that love can heal even the deepest wounds. Take care of him, and he'll take care of you. With all my heart, Evelyn." Martha read the letter aloud to Jack, her voice breaking. When she finished, Buddy, who had been sitting nearby, climbed onto the porch swing where Evelyn had spent so many evenings. He looked at Martha, then at the garden, as if to say, "I'm still here." After Martha read Evelyn's letter, it felt as though a piece of Evelyn's spirit had come back to life. Buddy, the giant baboon who had once been seen as an oddity in the quiet town, now stood as a living embodiment of Evelyn's kindness. The garden that Buddy tended became a central part of the story. What had once been a simple patch of flowers and vegetables grew into something extraordinary under Buddy's care. Visitors often remarked that the blooms seemed brighter and the fruit sweeter, as if the soil itself held some magical quality. But what truly set the garden apart was the way Buddy shared it. Every morning Buddy would gather flowers, vegetables, and fruits from the garden and carry them in an old wicker basket that Evelyn had used. He'd walk through the town, stopping at houses where he sensed someone might need a bit of joy. If a neighbor was unwell, Buddy would leave a bouquet of flowers on their porch. If a family was struggling financially, they'd find fresh vegetables and fruit waiting for them in the morning. At first, people were surprised and even skeptical, but over time they came to trust Buddy's intuition. Somehow he always seemed to know who needed help the most. One day, Buddy arrived at the doorstep of a young boy named Dylan. Dylan was shy and often kept to himself, but when he opened the door and saw Buddy holding a small pumpkin and a handful of wildflowers, he broke into a wide grin. "Thanks, Buddy," Dylan said softly, reaching out to pet him. From that day on, Dylan spent his afternoons in Evelyn's garden, helping Buddy weed the flower beds and water the plants. For Dylan, who had lost his father the year before, Buddy became a source of comfort and friendship. Buddy's actions began to ripple through the community. Inspired by his generosity, the townspeople started contributing to Evelyn's garden. They brought seeds, tools, and compost, helping to expand the space into a lush, vibrant sanctuary. Martha and Jack, who now oversaw the property, worked alongside Buddy and the volunteers. Though Buddy remained the heart of the garden, the effort became a collective one, a way for the town to honor Evelyn's memory. One afternoon, as Buddy supervised the planting of a new row of sunflowers, Jack turned to Martha. "Who would have thought a baboon could bring this town together?" he said with a chuckle. Martha smiled, wiping dirt from her hands. Evelyn knew that's why she raised him the way she did. Despite Buddy's gentle nature, he was fiercely protective of the property and the people he cared for. This became evident one stormy night when the unexpected happened. A group of teenagers, looking for trouble, decided to sneak onto the property. They had heard stories about Buddy and thought it would be funny to taunt the legendary Baboon. As they climbed over the fence and approached the barn, Buddy appeared in the shadows, his large frame illuminated by flashes of lightning. He let out a low, guttural growl, stopping the intruders in their tracks. "Whoa, look at him," one of the boys whispered nervously. But when one of them threw a rock in Buddy's direction, he roared, a sound so powerful it sent the boys scrambling back over the fence. By the time Jack arrived with a flashlight, the teenagers were long gone. Buddy stood near the barn, his posture tense but calm, as if to say, "I took care of it." From that night on, the town saw Buddy not just as a gentle gardener, but as a protector, a guardian of Evelyn's legacy. News of Buddy's remarkable actions continued to spread, reaching far beyond the small town. A local journalist wrote a feature story titled, "The Baboon Who Tends a Garden and a Community," which went viral. Soon, reporters and wildlife enthusiasts from across the country were flocking to see Buddy and the garden. At first, Martha and Jack were hesitant to allow so much attention. They didn't want Buddy to feel overwhelmed or exploited, but they quickly realized that the attention could be used for good. Buddy had become more than a local hero. He was a symbol of resilience, love, and community. The garden, now a sprawling sanctuary, drew visitors from all over, but despite his fame, Buddy remained the same, humble, devoted, and always tending to the garden that Evelyn had started. Martha and Jack worked tirelessly alongside him, ensuring that the garden thrived. Buddy's actions inspired people to come together, not just to grow plants, but to nurture hope in their own lives. But no one could have foreseen what Buddy would do next. One crisp autumn afternoon, Buddy was in the garden picking apples from a tree while Martha swept the porch. The air was cool, and the sunlight streamed through the branches, casting golden patterns on the ground. It was a peaceful day, the kind Evelyn would have loved. But the peace was shattered by a sudden cry. Martha dropped her broom and looked toward the street. A young girl, no older than 6, was standing by the garden gate, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Help, my brother, he's hurt," she sobbed. Martha ran to her. "What happened, sweetheart?" The girl pointed toward the woods that bordered the property. "He fell by the creek. He's stuck and I can't get him out." Before Martha could respond, Buddy sprang into action. He leapt over the garden fence with surprising agility for his size and bounded toward the woods. "Buddy, wait!" Martha called, but he was already gone. Buddy moved through the woods with purpose, his powerful arms propelling him forward. He followed the sound of the boy's faint cries until he reached the creek. The boy, who couldn't have been more than 10, was lying at the bottom of a steep embankment, his leg trapped under a heavy log. His face was pale, and tears streamed down his cheeks. Buddy approached cautiously, his dark eyes filled with concern. The boy froze, his fear of the baboon momentarily eclipsing his pain. But Buddy didn't hesitate. He climbed down the embankment, gripping rocks and roots with ease, and reached the boy's side. Gently he inspected the log, testing its weight. With a strength that seemed almost superhuman, Buddy wrapped his long arms around the log and lifted it just enough for the boy to pull his leg free. You saved me," the boy whispered, his voice trembling. Buddy barked softly, as if to say, "You're safe now." By the time Martha and the girl arrived, Buddy was carrying the boy on his back, carefully navigating the uneven ground. Martha's heart swelled with pride and relief as she saw them emerge from the woods. "Buddy, you're incredible," she said, tears streaming down her face. The boy's parents arrived shortly after, overjoyed to find their son safe. They hugged him tightly, thanking Martha and Buddy repeatedly. But it was Buddy who had made the rescue possible. The story of Buddy's heroic rescue spread like wildfire. News outlets from across the country picked up the story, calling him the hero Baboon. People were amazed not only by his intelligence but by his unwavering kindness and courage. Offers poured in from wildlife organizations, talk shows, and even movie producers wanting to feature Buddy's story. But Martha and Jack were careful to protect him from the spotlight. "This isn't about fame," Martha said during an interview with a local journalist. "It's about love." Buddy is continuing Evelyn's legacy of kindness, and that's what matters most. With donations from around the world, Buddy's Garden of Hope grew even larger. The property expanded to include a wildlife rehabilitation center, a community garden, and an educational program for children. Buddy became the unofficial mascot of the program, often sitting with the kids as they planted seeds and learned about nature. He had a special way of connecting with them, especially those who were shy or struggling. One day, a little girl who had recently lost her mother approached Buddy with a bouquet of wildflowers. "These are for you," she said softly, "because you make people happy." Buddy took the flowers gently, holding them as if they were the most precious gift in the world. As the years passed, Buddy continued to touch countless lives, but even the strongest hearts grow weary with time. One spring morning, Martha found Buddy sitting in the garden, his gaze fixed on the horizon. His movements were slower now, his once strong frame softened by age. Martha knelt beside him, stroking his fur. "You've done so much, Buddy. Evelyn would be so proud of you." Buddy turned to her, his dark eyes filled with a depth of emotion that words could never capture. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Buddy passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by the garden he had tended so lovingly. Buddy's passing left a void in the community, but his legacy endured. The garden continued to thrive, a living testament to his and Evelyn's shared spirit of kindness. A statue of Buddy was placed at the center of the garden, depicting him holding a bouquet of flowers. Beneath it, a plaque read, "In memory of Buddy, the baboon who taught us the power of love, loyalty, and kindness." Children still visit the garden, learning about nature and the story of the remarkable baboon who changed so many lives. And every spring, when the flowers bloom in vibrant colors, it feels as though Buddy is still there, watching over the garden and the people he loved. Because in every flower, in every act of kindness, his spirit lives on.